And here we are with the Best Book Club. Once again, this is Sasalam, aka New Fatora, and this episode I am joined by Hans Gutherson.
Hello, everybody.
JCCW.
Hi.
And MysticMan.
Hey yo.
That's it. And this episode is a very special debate episode. And so what's going to happen is the three guests I've assembled here today are going to be duking it out over what the best wedgie in literature is. And they're going to be going through multiple rounds in a tournament-style debate, each one being its own mini debate, and then we'll finally see definitively the best wedgie in literature. Now, when I say what makes the best one, I'm talking about in reading and writing. And those do go pretty hand in hand. There are some differences, but in general, having a lot of likability, understanding the purpose and meaning in the story, what it adds to the narrative is really what we're going for here today. Now, when for anybody listening and for the debaters themselves, even if you don't like something, that may not necessarily mean that it's not better than the thing that you do like. Because there is a difference. I don't have an example on hand, but there is a difference between not liking something and it not being better. And so before we start the debate, don't want to hold it up too long, but just a couple of ground rules. Allow whoever's speaking to speak. Don't interrupt them. This is a debate, not an argument. And so each person will have their time to speak their piece and get out their argument, their side, and then the next person will take up where they left off. Always be respectful of the other's opinions, and then most importantly, have fun. And so for today's debate, round one will be the atomic wedgie versus the shoulder wedgie. The second round will be the frontal wedgie versus the jocklock wedgie. The third round will be the hanging wedgie versus the self wedgie. And the fourth round will be the normal wedgie versus the squeaky clean wedgie. And then it will progress and we will see what happens after. So debaters, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
All right. So first round, atomic versus shoulder. Let's get debating.
Alrighty then.
Where does everybody stand on this one? Because this one's very special.
It seems to me pretty clear cut in a way that shoulders are almost literally just lesser atomic wedgies. Like they literally don't go as high, the underwear doesn't stretch as much. The only maybe benefit is you can hide them a bit easier. You just hide them under a shirt, but you can still hide an atomic too. It's just put on a hood, and we've seen that in some stories as well. So to me, it seems pretty clear. Like atomics just better in terms of stretchability of the underwear. You get just a bigger wedgie, which I think almost always translates to a better one. And there's a lot more I could dive into, but that's from the starting point where I stand.
That's actually kind of where I want to pick up on. I do not think that wearing a hood covering up the atomic does any benefit to the actual atomic itself. I think that actually lessers the impact of an atomic if you try and hide it, because the whole point of the atomic is that people laugh that it's over your head, and that's humiliating and therefore hot for us. And trying to hide that, that's not fun. The appeal of the shoulder and wearing it in the jacket is in and of itself what makes it incredibly sexy, because it's not trying to be seen by everybody. It's like that haha, no one knows what I'm doing kind of thing, which has led to actually some pretty good art of the shoulder wedgie. One done by Love Lucia, of her OC, where I think the name literally is Lucia, is wearing a black jacket, and you can see like some pink, and someone says, "Hey, nice shirt," like off screen, and then the next panel over is where you see through the jacket, and you reveal that, hey, it's actually a shoulder wedgie, and man, that is so freaking good. Like, that to me is the biggest appeal of the shoulder wedgie, in that it's incredibly fun to try and hide that behind something like, a jacket. And I will probably say, well, I'm probably gonna root for Atomic to move on. The shoulder wedgie does have a huge advantage in that category, at least. I don't think the Atomic scores any points in trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm. Hang on, though. You mentioned a lot of art. I thought we were debating about writing.
Dang, that's right.
So I am kind of split in the middle here. Yeah, no pun intended. But
Nice.
I am half and half on this, because on the one hand, Hans raises a really good point about whether or not it's just a lower version of an Atomic or not. But I'm kind of neutral about this, so I want to hear. Let's see. I mean, you mentioned art, so what would your writing reasons be? Because you could argue back and forth, like the appeal is hidden, and you can write it in like a really kind of erotic scene where it's like, oh, they're hiding it, and then someone they like comes along and it's like, oh God, no, they're gonna find out. Or something like that. So yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of like how I would write a scene of a shoulder compared to writing a scene of an Atomic. And I've written a scene in an Atomic, but I cannot think of a single shoulder scene that I have written. It'd be a story for another day if I ever decide to go that route, but that's if I ever wanted to actually go that route.
Yeah. So would it come down more to like a public versus a private kind of thing? Because what I'm getting at through the various things that Hans and you have mentioned is that a shoulder wedgie is more of like a private thing, perhaps between a significant other or just within writing to make tension or something like that. Whereas an Atomic is just, it's out there. You can't really miss it. Even if you put a hood on it, you can probably notice some fabric on the edges or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alrighty.
I think Mystic, you bring up a great point, and JCCW, to your point, I think what we're talking about is shoulder as a secret sort of wedgie, and something that, to its credit, unlike Atomic, is sort of kept undercover and gains value being that, unlike an Atomic, which, like you said, you want to see it displayed, but a shoulder, when it is on display, it's kind of like, why didn't you pull it over her head? You kind of missed an opportunity there. But when it's under the clothing, then yeah, like you mentioned, Mystic, you can get those opportunities of like, oh, someone I like is now coming towards me. How do I deal with this now? Stress. What if they find out that I have this? Very similar to a bra connection wedgie in that way, right? So to my mind, it does have that value, but that's one sort of value to it, the sort of secretive element, whereas like an Atomic sort of spans. It's more pain, it's more domination, it's being able to sort of break someone and really humiliate them in a public sort of way, and everyone sees that on display, which I think sort of speaks to its value as a device in the story, that it's just more varied than a shoulder.
Gotcha. Well, in that case, I mean, I'd have to throw my lot in with Atomic because, like, excuse me, the enchiladas are coming back up. But, like, the shoulder had its merits, but overall, you got a good point. The Atomic is a little more flexible.
You know what we're skimming over with the shoulder aspect compared to the atomic aspect?
Mm-hmm.
The atomic only focuses on the back, but the shoulder has the advantage of going far up in the front.
Mm-hmm.
I
But-
think that is a value that it has over the atomic. Because the atomic, you have to like force it to go up in the front, like on your own if you want it to go far up. But for the shoulder, it just does that naturally because it has to go up on both sides equally.
Okay.
I
Right.
I think that does add some pretty good value to the shoulder, especially because the front can be very fun in a way, both in a private setting and in a public setting, because crotch is funny, and therefore it can lead to humiliation, and therefore it can be pleasurable for us.
Mm-hmm. But writing.
I think I just wanted to throw that out, that I thought that the shoulder does actually have some value in like going up in the front.
It's
Fair
a fair point. Yeah, it's a fair point. The implication you'd think would be if you're pulling the underwear far enough that it's going over their head, you would get a similar amount of sort of pressure in the front as well, because so much fabric has to be forced out the back, right, to go over their head. More so than you think if it just had to sort of go up to their shoulders. But it's a fair point. In that way, it is sort of better than a frontal, but still not as big as maybe some other big wedgies where like tons of pressures on the front. But yeah, you do. I think it's fair to say
I wanted
get sort of an
to
all
throw my
around
hat in the
thing.
ring for specifically that part of the shoulder.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Well, both raised excellent points, but ultimately, I think I'm gonna go with the atomic.
Yeah.
It's got a little more oomph to it. You know what I mean?
That is very fair, and you can't beat a classic.
That's
No, it is certainly a classic. If you mention like what's a great story with a shoulder wedgie, can you think of one as quickly as you can if I say atomic and you think of ones like all the
Gosh, I
stories
can't.
that just have its name?
Gosh, great story. Like, I struggle to think of a story with a shoulder.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some off the top of my head. I struggle to think of it, which isn't a great argument itself, but simply the fact that there's so many stories that are well known for having atomic wedgies to start with, and I want to save some of this for if I get pushback on atomic being the best ever in stories. But even ones like An Afternoon Atomic by Garrett 2142 on DA, which is a hugely popular story, and it starts off with an atomic and has the name right in it. And there's so many that you could just think of. They're kind of iconic in the art we've seen. Not to dwell on the art point, of course, because we're talking about writing, but there really is something climactic about getting it over the head. Something so purposeful in the domination aspect and sort of completion of it. That's almost maybe only equaled maybe by like a ripping, maybe to see that sort of end to a wedgie. That's as satisfying
That's
as
a
a
that's a good way
reader, I
to put
guess.
it.
Yeah, good point.
I think I finally remembered like a story with the shoulder wedging in it. I was thinking back to my stories, and I was like, wait a minute. Technically, the Valentine's Day story included that, but nobody really remembers the fact that it was a shoulder. They more remember the fact that someone gave birth while getting a wedgie. So
That's
that's not even
certainly
a point in the shoulders. That's not even a point in the shoulders' favor.
yeah.
It's just there.
That's certainly what
It
stands
got
out
it
in
got
people's
it got
mind.
outclassed by a completely different element. So I think
Yes.
by de facto the atomic has to move on.
Yeah. And it's college days, right? That sticks in my mind for that first atomic and things. But I'll save a lot of that in case we get pushed back in the later rounds. If people say atomic shouldn't win, but
We got more to get through.
yes.
Yep. So this first bout, I think it goes to the atomic.
Woohoo! Atomics for the win.
So 3-0 atomic versus
Yeah,
shoulders. Is that correct?
I gave some decent art. Like I gave some.
They were
decent
excellent
for shoulder.
They were excellent art. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, fantastic points all around. And while I was listening, just great point. Atomic is obviously the favorite here for not just the debaters, but in general, because it is such a climactic move, as was said. But being able to give those counter arguments against it really shows that you guys are prepared for this, and I'm not very happy with that. So
Yeah,
I think this is a well-deserved win for the Atomic, 3-0 in the first round. And so moving on to the second round, we have the normal wedgie versus the squeaky clean wedgie. Here we go.
All for normal. All for normal. I am going to argue that all day, every day. And the reason I'm going to argue for the normal wedgie is not only is it just like, it is just as classic as the Atomic, but also it is the, yeah, I'm going to say it. This is the most realistic wedgie in the whole bunch. It's the one that you are always bound to come across in your whole life. Because let's be real here, as much as we would love for every girl ever to have stretchy enough underwear to get over their head, that is just not possible at all. In all of my experience, the underwear has, the farthest it has ever gone is to the neck, and it was with specifically stretchy underwear. For majority of it, for just normal ass underwear, it only goes to at the most like the mid back. The normal one, and it's the only one in here that is just that you can actually replicate in real life, and therefore you have the real experience necessary to put it into a story. Like, from my own experience, it's fucking hard giving like normal wedgies in some pairs of underwear, and trying to like feel like the strength in order to like really get it up, like it can really translate into a story because you can convey that, yeah, it's taking a long time to try and just get a good, yank up. And that's really good. Like that is some really fun things to explore in a story. Like not just like, hey, the wedgie's here and it's really fun. This is a struggle and something you want to work with because you really want to give this. And that is why I'm going to say normal all the way, and I'm not changing my vote on that.
All right. But I do offer one little thing. So with the squeaky clean, mind you, in writing, say that you're new, you can milk a squeaky clean pretty hard. Oh, wait a minute, that sounded there in my head. You can get a lot of mileage, there we go, out of a squeaky clean in a story if you do the writing just right. What was it? I know I can't reference one particular story, but I know that there has to be at least one out there where there's probably a decently long scene where it's basically just some poor schmuck getting absolutely tormented by two other people at once.
Yeah.
To give you some credit, JC, you're right. Definitely not realistic, but there is some writing merit to it, simply because like you can probably get a little more. Well, I mean, to be fair, this is the classic, so it is a normal edgy, so like it's pretty hard to beat that anyway. But it's not a completely lost cause because you can still write about it and kind of use it as friction. Gutter. You can still use it differently with like a 2 versus 1 scenario as a way to build up tension between one person versus two of them, whether or not they can actually do anything about it that could add or take away from your story elements. So, Hans, I'm curious, what's your side of the argument then?
It's tough because normal fundamentally is so classic. From it, all other wedgies spawn, arguably, and yet Jocklock, when you think about it, is a normal and it's a frontal. It's sort of the best of both worlds. And if we were arguing what's the most realistic, clean? Yeah, sorry, squeaky clean. My bad. I was looking at wrong notes. Squeaky clean. Thank you. Yeah, if we're arguing realism, then Atomic would have to lose, and a lot of the others here would have to lose, and Normal would instantly win. But when it comes to the stories we're writing, even if they're as realistic as they can be, there's often, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to give a Wedgie. So even giving a normal one can be very tough in real life. So I think it's fair for us to argue normalcy and its sort of realism value doesn't necessarily maybe make it better in a story when you could go a bit harder and you can sort of push the boundaries of realism to get other elements and other more intense wedgies in there. That might be my argument to that. But yeah, for a squeaky clean, I think you do sort of get the best of both worlds. You do get, as Mystic pointed out, a level of domination and pain that definitely goes beyond the normal. You get a lot of bully dynamics and really intense sort of pain and humiliation of being sort of 2-on-1 ganged up on that you don't get with a normal, because a normal, implicit within that, of course, is a lot of limits. You can't go too high, you can't rip it, you can't bounce them, you can't pull for particularly long, or it wouldn't really be normal, quote unquote. So the squeaky clean gives you a lot of freedom to explore some of those elements in the stories that I think really connect with people, the sort of pain aspect of it, but maybe also the pleasure, because then you're stimulating the front, right, as well, in that intense way. And that squeaky clean too doesn't just have to be two people. It's one you could give to yourself. It's one person can give to you going either side. Whereas a normal, I think it also implies it's one person giving it to you. So very limiting in that too. So squeaky clean, I think, has a lot of potential that I think shouldn't be overlooked. And like Mystic said too, it can really carry stories and be something that sort of brings them to a next level beyond just normal wedgies, or even more common ones that don't hit on a lot of what we're talking about, the pain, pleasure, potentially the two people or more than one, or a lot of those different elements of it. I think like in stories like The Remote, where it gets really intense and there's squeaky clean that almost like really hurts the character Nadia, I think it was, and she's sort of like freaking out at the end of it, and the character realizes like I went too far. You can't really get that in the normal because it is so limited, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see that. One small thing that I want to mention before I get to like something else that I like really think would be is in the normal's favor. One thing I just wanted to bring up is the two-person aspect. You cannot tell me the idea that two people going from the back and just going at it like together, just going for a nice, clean, hard yank normal is not as effective as one person going from the front and one person going from the back. They are both equally just as great and can lead to just as great wedgies. But the other thing that I wanted to mention about normals, and one thing that I think really helps it, we are talking about writing. And I will concede to Mystic's point that you can really draw out a wedgie with a squeaky clean because, you can just keep going back and forth, and you can just keep getting the wedgie out. However, for the normal, it has to be over like decently quickly, unless you actually do something with the normal. And this is what I think the normal strength is. It is so basic that you can focus all of your attention in the giving scene to how each character feels about what the situation is, why this is happening to them. You can almost, in a sense, just explore the character's mindset as each of them are experiencing this one event. Like, you can have the giver thinking about just all of the ways that they want to inflict pain and humiliation onto the person that they are giving a wedgie to, and the person getting, you can explore just how this either like they want to cover their face and hide from the embarrassment, or they just need to control themselves because they absolutely adore the emotion. For the squeaky clean, there's so much going on there that you sort of have to focus on just how the wedgie just keeps moving. While the normal, you have a lot more breathing room to discuss character and just how the people actually feel. And I think that is a huge strength in the normal's favor.
That's a. Oh, I didn't actually think about that part.
It's a fair point. You're right. When you do get into something like a squeaky clean, that does sort of maybe clutter up the action a bit, and could detract. I think you make a fair point if you try to then dive into interactions in the same way when you have something as simple as a normal. But I mean, just to respectfully push back on some of your earlier points, I probably we could argue you could explore interactions with a squeaky clean too. It might be different interactions though, and it might be something you can sustain over a longer period of time, maybe if you're doing a squeaky clean. But at the same time in wedgie stories can sort of last however long you want, so you probably have a stronger point that you can dive into it without the clutter. But yeah, with a squeaky clean, you'll get different sort of emotions and feelings, and maybe a broader range, like pain in the front, but also maybe more pleasure. If they're doing it, it's probably for a sort of bullying aspect. But what if they really want you to do it? Or what if they want you to do it, but then it becomes too much too quickly? Or you just sort of get into this situation like a sore winner where it really is just a next level sort of bullying situation. But yeah, I do like your point that the clutter can be a bit much if you're trying to balance like a detailed wedgie scene that has a lot of moving parts, which a squeaky clean does, compared to a normal.
All right. Well, in that case, I would. Both decent points, but I'm still gonna have to cast my ballot with the normal, because JC is right in that when writing, with the normal, you can focus more on the dynamics of the characters, whereas with a squeaky clean, you have to describe. I guess you just have to describe the scene more than the characters. And I'm definitely more of a character person, so I'd have to go with normal then. There's my vote tally.
And I am not changing my vote to normal, so it's Ryan just essentially giving like what he thinks, and we can just send normal off to the next round.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I heard 2 definitive votes for normal. Hans, what is your vote?
Man, that's tough. Those are awesome points you guys made, of course. I think I'll stick with squeaky clean just so it has somebody to go with it to the grave. But yeah, you basically swayed me there, I think. Some cool arguments.
Absolutely. There were some fantastic points made again, and I think that's going to be the recurring theme here. Just have fantastic minds battling it out, and I have a front row seat, to quote The Office and Creed. When I can't remember exactly what the point was, but something made me think of the one story. It's told, Hans, you would absolutely be able to tell what it is just from this description. First person perspective. The main character's name is Sarah. She's in college. Yes. I was wondering if that was it, and I wasn't sure. That story, one of the greatest in my opinion, has a squeaky clean in it. And I think that's a point towards squeaky clean. But what we have here, 2 votes to normal, 1 vote to squeaky clean. The debaters have spoken. Normal moves on to the second round.
Nice.
For the third round, we have the frontal versus the jocklock. Here we go.
Which one?
Can we skip this one? Maybe we just forget this.
Look, no. we may as well just flip a coin to decide which one goes off, because both of these, like, all right, I gotta first mention something. I said normal was really good for character stuff, and I think that is worthy to mention. How does that translate to frontals? And I'm going to say that frontal has the exact opposite, is the exact opposite of a normal in terms of that aspect. I think a frontal actually is way too limited in character work, because the frontal, it's going in the front. Like what else are you supposed to do with that scene other than think about the person getting. Like, what is their reaction going to be in one of our stories? Are we ever going to convey a frontal with pain? If so, why don't we just use a different Wedgie? Like, what is the point of you doing the frontal for pain? We would only ever use it if we wanted to convey some sort of pleasure. It's incredibly limiting in that aspect, incredibly limiting for character. And I think it is just has absolutely no potential, whereas the normal actually has a lot of potential. So the frontal Wedgie, I'm going to give my vote to the Jocklock, because the frontal is inherently so limiting in its own design that I will not allow it to move on.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. This is probably going to be the fastest round, actually.
I think so, yeah.
I have to agree with that, because the Jocklock and the frontal is like, pretty much is what JC brought up. It's pretty limited in what it can do, both writing and reading, I guess, of different strokes, different folks. But with the Jocklock, at least when writing it, you can get kind of like what I was mentioning earlier. I forget which point already. My memory has gotten worse. But at least with the Jocklock, you can go with a sort of how I put it. You can go with maybe a slow burn kind of writing scene, or maybe something to do with waiting or patient torture or something like that. So I'm going to have to cast my vote with the Jocklock, because the frontal is just meh.
At least the Jocklock, it can make for an interesting intro Wedgie, where the story starts, the person's stuck in a Jocklock, someone comes by to help them. At least it has that. The frontal doesn't have that at all.
Oh.
The Jocklock at least has one interesting thing you can do in a story, and it's at least one.
You know what you're making me think of? I'm pretty sure each of us has to have seen at one point a movie where, well, I forget what the song was, but there's a song tied in with that iconic movie start, where it starts off chaotic as just absolutely crazy scene with your main character in the middle, just so you're probably wondering how I got here.
Yeah, basically.
It sounds the Jocklock sounds like it would be that, but our version of it. So it's so you're probably wondering how I wound up here with my legs inside my leg holes. Well, let me tell you, back to 12 hours ago or something like
that.
I'm totally making a one-off story where I start off with that.
It's great. Yeah. And I could see, and I think we have seen, although the names escape me, stories that have started with people sort of hanging. So it's almost like that, but I haven't seen sort of Jocklocks, I think, as the start. But yeah, I love that we're sort of hate voting for Jocklocks, because we don't want to vote for frontal.
Yeah, I don't like voting for Jocklock, but
yeah, but
I hate voting for frontal more.
I think I'm with you guys on this. I personally, anecdotally, which is always a more dangerous way to argue, they've never been my favorite. Seeing them or viewing them, I would argue they're maybe not as limited as we maybe think at first glance. They can be a pain, or they could be an intense pleasure thing, and they're. But still, that's two things compared to one.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be one or the other in my mind. Beyond that, it's I don't see how you could have any other reaction to it. Whereas a normal, you can maybe transition from one to the other. Or you can, if it's a squeaky clean, there's sort of a change there. There's something dynamic. But yeah, if you started a story and their underwear's just hanging out the front a bit, it's kind of this is boring. But if they're stuck in a Jocklock, you get it with a Jocklock. You of course get they're kind of trapped. They're kind of stuck there, and whatever they do to try to escape is going to make it worse. That implication is always very interesting and potentially exciting too, since it basically becomes a self wedgie that's harder to get out of in most cases. Plus, you can sort of translate a Jocklock into maybe you get carried around by it. I think we've seen some stories where that sort of happens. like a purse or like a backpack. I feel like Between Two Cheeks maybe had done that, and I think we see it from time to time. So, yeah, I like it for the sort of flexibility that we found appealing in like an atomic, for example. Yeah, so I gotta throw my vote in with Jocklock.
I'm just
So
voting
I think we are unanimous. Get Frontal the fuck out of here and send in the Jocklock to the next round, despite the fact that none of us like that it's moving on.
for it because of the whole, yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here.
We all have to write stories like that now.
It's just
I don't think I've ever written a Jocklock. I've done, I'm sure, some frontals.
I've
and they haven't been
never
big,
written
but
a Jocklock before.
on the top of my head, I don't think I've ever done it, which is interesting.
I think
I think that makes it pretty clear.
Yep.
I think that makes it pretty clear that the Jocklock is moving on to the next round with 3 votes. So far, this tournament has been pretty one-sided, so hopefully there is an upset somewhere. Who knows? I guess we'll find out. But
the upset was just
moving
Jocklock on to the next round because none of us want that.
I don't know.
It's just that it was up against the other worst thing.
The only person that I've kind of been associated with that really was into frontals as much as you guys dislike them is Non on Lucky Fetish. That's about it. But yeah, so the 4th round, we have the Hanging versus the Self. Here we go.
This one, I think, may be the most controversial round.
Hanging.
I do not know.
Mystic.
Because the Hanging is a very popular Wedgie. Do we all agree on that?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how many of us find it deliberately sexy or fun to write, but I'm going to cast my vote for the Self because there are a million ways you can write the Self Wedgie, and you can do it as creatively as possible. You can include every Wedgie here in the Self Wedgie, and I think it can add for a ton of fun character. I think it can make for a really fun story. I think it can... Gosh, I lost track because I just thought of an example of one of my favorite Self Wedgies. It was one Cicetta did in his the Gauntlet series, where Hinata had to cover her tracks by giving herself a frontal hanging wedgie, and it's just so fun seeing what you can do with a Self Wedgie. And I will say 100% voting for Self.
Oh, that's such a good argument.
It is, yeah.
The only thing I have for Hanging is, I guess, to be fair, I'm also heavily biased because, in the very little that I've written, which is very little, what was it? And with the one romance story that I did, they included a hanging inside of it as a way to basically be like, oh god, she's right there, and oh my god, she's hot, I can't do this anymore. Ah! Oh, but all the other points were so right though, because in essence, a Self Wedgie is just any other wedgie that you give to yourself. So it's the sum of its parts. Oh.
Self Wedgie 2 OP.
Okay, I need another angle here. What do you got, Hans?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, and not when I thought of it first. That, as you both mentioned, Self is you can translate any wedgie into it, and if Atomic is the best, wouldn't a Self Atomic be equally as good or better, sort of thing? And yeah, that would kind of argue Hanging has a lot of variety as well, too, in the fact flagpole wedgies, sort of what to me have always been the epitome, and we see the sort of classic cartoony climax of even a Lucy and Daniela, where a big moment is everybody standing around and seeing the new flag, something that came up again and again in Between Two Cheeks stories, even at the end of his big Wedgie War series, with Ashley sort of hanging there from the flagpole, and that's all hangings, right? But everything from sort of dangling in someone's hand, if they're able to lift you off the ground, that's basically a hanging, like a and Callista sort of thing from three Wedgie perspectives. That's sort of a hanging until you transition to like a ripping or something.
Dang, that's right.
So self is great because if we're talking and if we sort of hold to the idea that the less clutter there is in a story, the less going on, the more you're able to deal with sort of what's going on in a person's mind, then a self can work for that. But at the same time, so can a hanging if you're just stuck there. Like after you're stuck hanging, it's going to be just you alone on a hook, maybe in a locker. You get that. And what are you left with but your thoughts? And you literally aren't able to get out. And you get like a sort of loss of control, a sort of powerlessness. That I think if you're into the submission domination angle of the fetish, which I think is pretty core to it, that I think being trapped and being stuck and needing to either bounce yourself out, so causing yourself more pain, or needing someone to help you out of it, which can further a story, or having to just be stuck there for a while until you sort some stuff out in your mind and your underwear rips, right? I think that's a very powerful literary device, and hangings, of course, we see in so many stories. I think it's certainly one of the most popular, as you mentioned, and I know in looking at statistics ahead of this, it's, I think, just shortly behind Atomic as the most popular. I know in our Times poll that you did a few years back, it was the second most popular, with Atomics being the first, and in Shadow's poll from much more recently, again, same thing. Hanging was the second favorite Wedgie for people, right after Atomic. So I think from that, if we're looking at people's opinions of them, hanging, I think for the reasons I mentioned, the powerlessness, the sort of humiliation of it, it's usually a public thing, but even if you're alone, still holds a lot of power in being stuck up there, more so than maybe a self wedgie, where it's usually done for pleasure or to discover pleasure. So in that way, the range of emotions it can cover can be a bit more limiting potentially.
You know, those are some really good arguments. Like I thought like this would be a clear cut, we're going self, but that is really convincing. I think the flagpole one is probably the one that I thought of. Like, yeah, that's probably the best example of it, because the flagpole is just so fucking great as a both as a plot device and also just for a really good wedgie. I will say this. This is going to be my big argument against the hanging. It fucking sucks writing it. My recent teacher-dominated story, I basically showed the two dualities of how you can write a hanging wedgie. It's either you can start off by showing somebody who was already hanging, and you can show somebody getting the hanging. And getting it just... it so fucking sucks to write. First of all, you have to start out by giving them a normal. So, like, the hanging is only just the other half of the wedgie, because you have to stretch out the underwear to a good amount before you can properly like get them hanging. Even on like a flagpole, you gotta yank them out until the leg holes get up, and then you gotta hook them, and then you gotta ring them up, and that's just a lot. It fucking sucks. Wherein a hanging is only, in my opinion, truly great is if you actually don't show them getting it, you only show the aftermath. And that just sucks. Where the self, you can just show it at any perspective, and it's great. I think that is probably my biggest argument against hanging, and why I will say that in a story, a hanging wedgie fucking sucks, and a self is where it's really at.
That's a fair point. Yeah, you do get that sort of level of ease as a writer when you're just like, I pulled on my own underwear and it felt good, sort of thing. But the only thing I'd say is if you're characterizing a bully, like you mentioned, teacher dominated by wedgies, in the case of Callista, the fact she went to these lengths, right, to hurt the teacher. She could have done whatever. She could have ripped her underwear. She could have pulled over her head. She has magical wedgie power. She could have done presumably anything. The fact she chose to do this wedgie, that, as you mentioned, is difficult to write because you have to translate the movement in the moment into getting them on the hook, and then gravity taking over, right? It's in the eternal words of Vicky, underwear plus gravity equals wedgie, right? She was hitting on the core point of hangings and how sort of even within that sphere outside of the fetish, how sort of core it is to sort of be dangling above the ground, to lose that control. So when we talk about hangings, right, it is a great character device to show these are the lengths I'm willing to go to embarrass you, to humiliate you, to put myself on top, in the case of Calissa in the story you mentioned. So she literally does all this work to sort of hang her up there. And she's done it before already, right? She hung up Ellie earlier in the story too. So she's clearly like so determined to dominate in such a public way, right? The only thing maybe better is like the sort of forced self-wedgie, which is not really a self-wedgie too. It's sort of like telling somebody to give. But the question is that a self-wedgie? I don't know. But the hanging for that purpose of characterizing a bully, of really allowing for that sort of humiliation that sets in after being on public display, I think it in some ways is more effective as a device for maybe characterizing people than maybe a self wedgie. Because if you're doing a self wedgie, it's like, I like them, I'm going to give myself one. And you do get some alternatives to that. JCCW, you wrote a story where someone went to college, right? And they went through a lot of different emotions where they felt kind of upset after they had given themselves a wedgie. But at the same time, you sort of get so much growth across the board in like your in your teacher dominated by wedgie story, when hangings are such a core part, I think.
I think that's fair. It's almost like a battle between direct and indirect characterization. And I'm a much bigger fan of direct characterization, so I think that's where we would probably differ. You like seeing the almost like, you know, it's like a hint of like, it's up to you to figure out the characterization of what the heck this means for this character. Where I'm all about the what is the character feeling in this direct moment, and I'm going to express that through like even just like simple like gestures in the body, but that's still like way more direct than just straight up not saying anything. So I think that would probably be the big difference. And I'm still going to say self, and I'm going to say that it has a lot more character potential than the hanging. But I think you make a very, very compelling argument.
Yeah. I'll just push back, and like I think I do, as you guys know, love direct characterization. I love characters saying what they're feeling or thinking it, often too much, like just digressing and thinking about their entire lives and all this stuff. But yeah, I think there can be an interesting balance, and I think you hit it in Teacher Dominated by Wedgies, where you have Calissa's dialogue very clearly saying what she's feeling, but then also you hint at stuff. We don't know why she hates Ellie so much, but we can kind of speculate, and that's unclear. So you get that indirect, and then balanced against her dialogue are the wedgies, which I like to interpret as a way of characterizing her beyond what she says, the fact she is to do these actions. So yeah, I'm going to stick with hanging, I think, as a device that really can add a lot to a story. Like it's such a high sort of quality wedgie. That's not really the word I want, but it's so intense compared to a lot of the other ones. It really adds like such power to it, and some of the most popular scenes, I think, or stories really do have moments where characters get hung up, because it is sort of the quintessential bullying tactic. And if we sort of hold to the idea that it's very cartoonish, and we like it for some of these cartoony reasons, and we like to see the cartoony aspects, hanging sort of sums that up almost as well as atomics do, I think.
So Mystic, you're going to be the vote that causes the big upset, because these, like I said, this is probably the most controversial like round we're gonna ever have in this whole thing. So Mystic, it's up to you, man.
I don't really mind that. Yeah, as you could imagine, my vote would go to. Wouldn't it just be funny if a mic cut out just now? Just
what did he say?
I'm
We'll
just
never know.
Computer crashes again.
Yeah, but no, my vote will just go to the hanging, because I was partial before we started, but then you laid out some really good points that just shook me, and I was like, wait, hold on. But wait. And then Hans like restored my faith, like, okay, we're good.
I was super tempted to change my vote. As soon as you said, like, self-wedge, you could do whatever he wants, like, geez, he's right. Doesn't self instantly win this whole thing? Can we just stop? But nah, I like hangings. But that was good, JCCW.
I think that's fair. I thought I'm still gonna hold my vote and say that I think that self should have moved on, but
you earned it, yeah.
like I can't doubt the power of the hanging, so I will humbly concede.
Well, there's 3.
I guess Noof could always be the tiebreaker.
All we have to really like talk about now is how badly we have to obliterate Jaw Clock with a hanging.
Wow,
it's funny, JCCW. Yeah, because it's funny, JCCW, just to hop off that, because you mentioned, right, like we joked, Mystic, you made a great point of starting a Wedgie with a Jaw Clock, and then right after that we talk about JCCW story, which starts with a hang, and we mentioned that being sort of a classic thing we see, but not Jaw Clocks. So yeah, we all have to go home, write stories that start with, you want to know how I got here? 2 minutes earlier. 30 seconds earlier, sort of thing. But yeah, sorry.
You're gonna see like 5 stories come out, and it just says, "Hey, it's me." You're probably wondering how I got here.
The exact same story. Yeah.
Let's corral it back up. Noof, take it away.
So, ask and you shall receive. I was not expecting this to be the upset. In my mind, I was all with JCCW. I thought Self would go at least to the finals. But Hans, that point about just the emotions you can convey and talk about during hanging, and just the introspection that a character can have during it because they have that time to figure it out. Just beautiful points all across the board. This is probably my favorite round so far, just because of the points you all brought.
Yeah, it was fun.
Probably the strongest arguments I've heard yet.
Great wedgies.
Yeah, they're two really great ones. And JCCW and I think, are both right. And it's tricky because we can argue, like, you can get more emotion with this one or that one. It's easier if we could, like, maybe point at stories where we've seen it done really well. But in a way, as writers, we kind of know, like, if we really take our time and extend it, like, we can draw out any wedgie. And it works with hanging. And it works with South because they are alone, and there isn't that clutter that we mentioned that sort of got squeaky clean kicked out of the running. But at the same time, I think it is really open, so it's tricky to say. But yeah, that was a fun round.
That was.
Oh, absolutely, and I think I was all for Self, and then I think I was a little convinced to go to the hanging side just because it was mentioned how difficult it is to write it. That might seem a bit odd, but the fact that it is so difficult to write it kind of makes me think that it's a higher obstacle to overcome. And so when you are able to overcome that, it means you succeeded. And in my mind, honestly, the self-wedgie is usually about pleasure.
Yeah.
Instead of any other angle. Although, I will bring up, Hans, you yourself have written a forced self-wedgie in YWNR.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I briefly mentioned it. Yeah, I briefly mentioned it. And I don't know if we would consider that like a true self-wedgie if you're being forced to give it to yourself. It's like a little complicated, but I guess still sort of counts.
Honestly, the big question after that round that I have is, what about the self-hanging wedgie? What do we do about that?
I guess it just wins. It just beats them both.
I've actually done that before. I did that in my all alone wedgie story.
Yeah,
and
that was the one I mentioned. Yeah, that was what I was talking about. The college one. That was a good story.
Yep, I was wondering how do I Like, how do we deal with that one where it's just somebody giving themselves a hanging? Like, do we give that in the point for the hanging, or do we give that in the point for the self? It's like, which one?
I think
point,
I think in that regard it would end up going to the self, because it's not so much the hanging that's being focused on, it's the fact that the person is doing it to themselves. The fact that it is such a brutal wedgie adds to that, but it's the fact that the person is giving themselves such a brutal wedgie is really what drives that wedgie so much in my mind.
All right, guys, hang on. Just shelve those thoughts for now, because we
Smart.
haven't started yet. We still have to go on to the next round.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right.
we're-
Still the
Some
next
of us have
round.
to argue for hanging maybe
No.
later, but I don't think so.
Just
We
shelve
gotta
it.
we gotta eventually talk about all this great hanging stuff when we're obliterating why Jock Lock sucks.
And
Oh,
that's why
true,
I'm
yes.
that's why I'm getting all my thoughts out now, because I'm not in these debates.
But
yeah,
let's
so
see. Let's
two-
move on.
Two other things. Luckily unlucky again, bringing it up by Anti-Cherry, one of the best writers in this community.
Yeah.
He put a hang wedgie in that story.
Yeah,
I think
luckily
that's a point
unlucky
towards
has a
hanging wedgies.
flagpole wedgie, which is great.
Yes.
And Lucy and Daniela, right? To me, flagpole was sort of the epitome. It was like the biggest wedgie at that point I could think to ever do. I was like, how do I top this? And Lucy and Daniela. So when you mention the difficulty of it, like the obstacle to get to and to overcome, I certainly felt that in the writing,
Yeah.
and I wasn't sure how do you sort of go above something as public, and especially because there was a group of cheerleaders giving it to her and sort of pulling her up the pole. But yeah, I just want to throw that out. I'm just still singing Hanging's praising before we move on to the next one.
Absolutely. And I think this does make for a good interlude between the preliminary rounds and the semifinals, but I think you couldn't the two atomic wedgies to Daniela in Lucy and Daniela, I don't think you ever topped them with anything else. They were, especially the second one. Ooh, that is
Dang it. But speaking of atomics,
We'll just take that. We'll just sample that clip for when we talk about what the ultimate wedgie is. So then, and we'll just put me saying, "Oh, flagpole is like it was the best," and we just put that can't beat the atomic. So all right, I think the debate's over, guys. We can go home now.
But speaking of atomics, our next round is. I said that the last thing was the biggest was going to be the biggest upset. This one, though.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, it will.
Oh my
It's going to
goodness.
be intense.
I've lost
One
tracks.
more
We have.
point. Oh, I'll recap.
Oh
it. Don't
yeah.
worry
Okay, I
about
see what
that.
it is. I see what. Oh jeez.
So
jeez.
the one last point I have before we move on to the
Mhm.
semifinals. JCCW, the point about direct versus indirect characterization, that hit me so hard. That is something I always talk about.
Yeah,
always.
I knew it would.
And
I knew he'd like that.
Hans can verify that.
I knew
because
he'd
it's
like
something I've
that,
talked
yeah.
about in every single episode of my podcast so far. I think even in the Wedgie Talk episode I did, that is something that I'm 100%. I need indirect characterization all the way. Let me figure it out, please.
Yeah, and you get that with some hangings, I think, but also with some selves
Oh,
moves.
absolutely.
They just do it, and you don't know why. But yeah, no,
That's
that was a
like
tough one. Either one of those,
indirect
like
is
if
like
you
a
said,
self where you walk
Yeah.
in on the person giving themselves,
Ooh,
and you're
yeah.
like, "Oh, what is going on here?" And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the writer decides not to tell you what's going on, and you have
Yeah.
to figure it out for yourself.
yeah, and you kind of get that in YW and R, where Hannah walks in and Tracy's hanging there. It's like, whoa, what are you doing there? It turns out she gave it to herself. Spoiler alert.
What?
But yeah, no, that's a really good point. Either of those could have won. If you'd been like self wins, I'd been a little sad. I would have cried a bit, but I'd accept it because they're both quite good. Yeah.
And that's why
But I
there's
think there's a difference in what you said, JCCW, versus what actual indirect characterization is. If it's just this is what's happening and there's no explanation through detail, inner dialogue, anything like that whatsoever, that's just poor writing. Versus indirect characterization, there are context clues you can use to figure out, like, the writer describes some body language or a quick snippet of thought that could actually clue you into what's going on, and then the pieces are continuously laid out until you figure out later down the road, okay, once you have a bigger picture in your mind of what's going on, what the characters are, okay, this is the character. This is what actually happened, you know?
I can see that. Like, mainly because this is coming from the writer the actual writer perspective, where I know what my body language is, and I know, like, in this moment, this body language is what, like, should happen. That I'm like, oh, that's, like, pretty direct. I feel like they would probably get that. So I guess it's all on, like, what the actual like line is on direct and indirect. How much is too direct and how much is too indirect. Like,
Oh yeah, and
if I had to give an example, it would be like in Hana and Sarah, where Hana has a habit of grabbing her right arm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like I include that so often that people just kind of get what that is. So that's pretty direct characterization. Where in in my teacher story, there's a moment where Callista grabs her wrist, and in the story alone, if you don't know any of the context around that, that's pretty indirect characterization because you have no idea why the heck she's decided to just grab her wrist out of nowhere. So I think it's all dependent on that line of like what is too direct for the audience, what is not.
Absolutely, but I'm always of the opinion that I'll write as intelligently as I think I should, as I would want to be, because I know, like, my audience. I always see my audience as intelligent. I'm not going to talk down to them in any way, but I think the point about you writing that sort of quirk, that tick that your character has, I think that is indirect characterization, because unless you explicitly state why they're doing that thing, it's just they're doing that thing, and the reader sort of intuits, okay, they're doing this because they're anxious, they're nervous, they're excited, what have you, you know?
Yeah, I see that. This is an interesting halftime show.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
I tried really hard not to accidentally insult all of your readers.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk a lot about this, but I also, like, I don't want to take up all your episode not talking about this, but I just quickly jump in and say, yeah, like, I loved that's the thing too, in terms of, like, what if you interpret something and it wasn't meant as you interpret it? Like I was saying to you, JCCW and Teacher Dominated, that I really saw her giving her a hanging as really deep indirect characterization about her motivations and how intense she is as a bully and how determined she is to embarrass people even though it's a lot of work, but she's not bothered by that because she really is just a savage bully. And you never say that in any way. You never straight up say, I'm going to give you a hanging because it will prove I'm the most dominant or whatever. You get some of that where she's like, I'm going to bully you because you're a teacher and that's going to help me on my way, but not the hanging specifically. And it's the wedgies, of course, that I think we are going to focus on because of the fetish and what we write. So much of the time, that's such a core part of it. So I thought that was a really cool indirect detail. But what if I'm just interpreting something that wasn't meant to be, and you're sort of like, nah, that wasn't indirect detail at all. You're crazy, Brian.
Absolutely. And I think this all just make for great interlude conversation in case anybody wants to skip from the preliminaries to the semifinals. But I think that is a good place to start back up with this debate tournament. First semifinal match. It is a huge match. It could go either way. We have the atomic versus the normal. Let's get it.
Oh,
fuck me.
I don't want to choose.
Gosh, this should be the final round, but it's the semifinal.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah, how in the fuck hell do we?
Or normal?
All right, you know what? I am going to continue to say normal, and I'm just going to start off by bringing the argument that I made for normal in the last round, where in that I think the normal can give way more character than the atomic ever would. Because while the atomic is very classic and is very sexy to write in a story, it doesn't really do much to add character because the whole point of an atomic is to get it on their head and laugh at them because their underwear is pulled over their head. There isn't really much else you can do with that. You can like have your one-off story where someone really likes getting an atomic, but it's not really the main focus of it. The normal, you just have way more options. You have way more character interactions with it. You can spend more time just thinking about what the character is doing because the normal is always in motion. You always have somebody just deciding, you know, we're going to pull until they finally decide to let go. And in that time, you can spend it all on character. Where in the atomic, it's just you have to go through and finish off the motion. And that's just not as fun, and it doesn't allow for as much character work. Like, the only character work that comes from an atomic is what happens after the atomic, and I don't think that's really a point in the atomic's favor. I think it's actually a negative. So I'm going to say normal should move on to the final round.
Okay. For me, I'm trying to decide which one I like the best, which, you know, is already hard enough because the normal has a lot of merit, as you've already put to it. But part of what can really add to an atomic within writing is that if you're like what Hans brought up earlier, is that you have to go out of your way to do it. You can use it as a way to emphasize something about your character using indirect character stuff.
Accurate. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Totally not fishing for anything. But that's a tricky one because both of them are so good. I mean, you can just use it to emphasize something about your character or try to make something more apparent. I need a coin. Where's my wallet? I need a coin.
I can feel that. I just don't think... I think the atomic works better as a plot device where characters discuss that, you know, getting this person who gave me an atomic wedgie made me feel really, you know, saddened in a way, or it made me feel like I was lesser. But I think that it doesn't allow for a good character moment. I think it only makes for a good scene to write. I don't think it makes for a scene that I would want to reread to try and find like a new way that a character like reacted to this happening, or read for like, oh, I didn't notice this part in the actual wedgie itself. Where the normal, you have all the opportunity to do that. So I do not think that the atomic should move on for it because we're talking about how we should write this.
All right, Hans, what do you have?
I have to push back though. Like, atomic has to win. I mean, so basically everything you're saying, JCCW, I agree with, but it's also true for an atomic, right? And I can't agree with the idea that it's not a scene you'd want to reread as much as like a normal. I mean, I mentioned An Afternoon Atomic to start, but stories like Euphoria by PQF on DA, College Days, like your whole story, College Days, it starts with the atomic, right? And so much of the action that follows is from that iconic sort of moment of Callahan getting the wedgie, right? And so much of is just fallout from that. It's her trying to come to terms with what happens. She wants revenge. Would she want that same sort of revenge if it was just a normal wedgie?
And I actually had College Days in mind when I like made that point where I said that it's only good for a plot device because everything you described just now about College Days is all in the aftermath of the atomic, which I don't think puts it in the atomic's own favor because I don't want to go back and reread the atomic scene. I want to go back and reread all the stuff of Callahan dealing with the fact that she got an atomic, which is not the same thing.
But I mean, none of that stuff matters if the atomic wasn't there to set it up, right? Like, if you told me, oh, she got a normal wedgie and here's all the fallout, it's like, why would... How does that make sense?
You did say that you wanted that... You did bring up that you can go back and reread the atomic part, and I just said that I don't think that's true. So
hang on. Let's tap the brakes for a second. I think I might have figured out the root of this. Okay, so here's so here's my question to each of you. I'm gonna start with JC, then I'll ask Hans the same thing. So JC, in your opinion, when you're writing a story, what is more important, the scene or the overall story arc?
By default, I have to say the scene because I don't think either are the most important. I think what's most important to me is the character moments. I think character is what drives a story most of all. If you don't have interesting characters, your story is never going. You'd never want to you never want to reread it. Like I'm a huge character guy, and that's because I think it's one of the most important aspects of a story. I could care less about the overarching story of Harry Potter. I could really care less about it. But what I love is I love reading about these characters. I love reading how Snape interacts with Harry, how Snape interacts with Dumbledore, how Harry interacts with Draco, how Hermione interacts with Draco, how Hagrid interacts with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. I like reading those character moments, and I can name off way more character moments than I can actual plot moments. So I would say that the answer is neither to your question, and that the most important is character moments. And if we have to say that a scene is a character moment, then I guess I would say scene. But I don't think that's what you mean. So I'm going to say character moments are what's most important to me.
How dare you? And weakness is character. Okay, Hans, you're up. Same question. What do you think would be more important to the story when you're writing? Would it be a scene or the overall story arc?
Obviously, it sort of depends if this is a longer story or a short one, but I gotta say overall arc, right? And because every scene has to build on one another, and no individual moment, if you're writing a longer story especially, is going to matter unless it all sort of comes together and means something in a cohesive package. So like JCCW, when we talk about college days in terms of readability and rereadability of the first part, chapter 1 has a lot more views and faves, right? Because it has that atomic than the other parts. Lucy and Daniela starts with the atomic, same thing, way more views. So clearly people love to read it. Clearly it does have that sort of power there and something people want to come back to. Same thing with Dulling a Knife when we talk about overall arcs, right? This 81,000 novel that Shadow Melder and I wrote, it starts with this atomic, not just because that's a fun wedgie, but because you really have to set something up. You have to set up the idea that she's going to get something so intense that she's going to want to go on this quest for vengeance, that she's going to want to leave her home and go and try to get revenge on these characters. Very similarly, right, to College Days, where she says, I'm going to go ambush somebody and give her a very intense wedgie so she knows not to mess with me.
All
And then,
right.
of course, from that, you get the action of like, but she's not going to do it, even though she embarrassed her so thoroughly and so painfully with an atomic. She's not going to get her revenge. And then eventually they're friends, right? So you get these character moments, but they're so interspersed with the wedgie and what came before. That's what makes it so key. It all starts with that atomic. So I think the whole story, when you think about it, it's iconic because of that, I think.
All right, so I think I figured out the crux of why you two can't agree. One of you is big picture, one of you is little picture. And in that lies normal versus atomic. What I'm here, oh god, it's becoming metaphorical. Where
Yeah, there is one thing I want to bring up about Dulling a Knife. Hans, your Jahuka illustration is adorable. It is really cute, and it shows a lot of character, and it also shows a normal.
oh
Yeah, even less than normal, but that wouldn't exist without the first atomic, which is my point, right? Which is, of course, a very intense character moment where you learn about June and her reactions and Caroline being a very savage bully. That sort of sets the tone for the entire story, much
But
like
it wouldn't
College
exist
Days.
because the atomic is a plot device, and while it does have character potential, it is not centralized on the character. It is only meant to push the characters forward. And I think that a normal is a lot more fulfilling in an actual character moment scene than an atomic is.
All right, so both of you have made your points. I think you two are just gonna have to agree to disagree. I'm gonna have.
I mean, we are going to after
Yeah.
that. I will fight tooth and
Yeah.
nail about this.
All right, so I figure, JC, you're gonna vote for normal. Hans is gonna go for atomic. I'll have to decide.
Yes.
Maybe
Jesus.
Nuff can help decide too. Oh, but he might tie it up. Oh no.
Okay, hang
That
on.
might
I
be
need,
okay, though.
I need something that has like an arrow and 2 coins or something like that. Okay, no. Okay, hold on. Which do I?
I have a coin right here. Do you want to flip it?
Oh lord.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna have to. Sorry, Hans. I'm gonna have to go with the normal because JC stabbed me right where it hurts, right with the characters in the scenes. Because I mean the main reason I'm even here is because one time it was like, hey, character thing. It's like, oh, I like characters. I'm gonna have to go for the normal. What
Man.
normal?
People's favorite
This is-
wedgie. The community's favorite wedgie. Like, it's not even an argument. That's people have voted in multiple polls, and Atomic has been their favorite. And I can't even
We'll
get it to win.
take a poll
The next
immediately
one.
after watching this, and we'll see what happens.
Jeez.
This is writing.
I can't even wait until the end of this debate. Oh, that was what the hell?
I'm just dead inside.
Normal moves on to the final round. Yes.
No, that was good. That was
I
well
am
fought. Though. You got me. You swayed him.
Hans, I'm 100% there with you. Oh my god!
The upset is real. The fans are throwing their beer cans in anger.
I'm just talking about writing. I'm not talking
They're
about
telling
art.
the
Don't get
ref
me
to
wrong.
kick the players off the field.
If this was art, let's go straight to the atomic side. But in writing, it's just.
And if we were counting art, I would probably have to give it to Atomic, but we're not because we're talking about writing.
Small victories.
Unfortunately, yes. So,
We went from
Wow,
the biggest
what-
upset.
what- to the even more biggest upset.
We just
so
hit two right off the bat.
To be expected, though, they were extremely level in playing field. So, one thing I want to bring up, but to be sure, we have 2 votes, JCCW and Mystic for normal, and Hans for atomic.
Yeah.
Yep.
1 vote for me in spiritual, whatever you'd call that.
Support,
A
one
vote
vote
that
in
doesn't
spirit.
count. Yes, a vote that doesn't count for atomic.
Pity votes. That's what
So-
this is. You're
so,
pitying the
Hans,
best wedgie.
No, it's not pitting at all. Atomic
kidding,
is
I'm
my
kidding.
favorite wedgie.
No, JCCW knows. He's a debater, man. He knows
Yes.
logic. He could talk circles around me. So no, it was well fought. It was well fought. I tried my
Yes,
best.
absolutely. That was
You
so-
definitely tried your best. I was like sweating bullets at a couple times. Like I had to look up the actual like dueling a knife illustration to make sure I knew like how was this as cute and as just normal wedgie as possible. And yes,
Yeah,
yes it was.
we're not arguing art though, too. But whatever.
Yeah.
I lost.
Yeah, I mean that is the nature of an uneven of having a debate with an uneven amount of people. That's kind of the point, is to have a tiebreaker.
That's
Yeah.
why I'm here.
But
Thank you, Mr.
one thing I would like to bring up, Hans, is that Lucy and Daniela happens to have over 300,000 views on Lucky Fetish, and is the only thing, not even the only story, but the only post pinned on the Lucky Fetish board in all of these sections that's not rules or you need to read this or this kind of thing. So bringing that up, is not entirely a fair metric, because in my mind, it's basically the pinnacle of Wedgie stories, and 1,000% deserves that and so much more attention.
If I was arguing with
so-
you enough and you said normal, I'd be like, but Lucy and Daniel's your favorite.
Yeah,
How?
I-
That'd be my whole argument.
Yep,
But I mean,
I-
we talk about readability. College Days Part 1. Lots more views and faves. Same as Lucy and Daniela Part
But
1. People are like,
I can't give that. I just can't
Yes.
give the Atomic that, like, that recognition that was what caused it. I would give it to the character, and in terms of character, I just don't think Atomic does good enough. And Mystic agreed.
I think you have to, in that sense, I think you do have to somehow look at the views and faves, comments, what have you, when the first part was put out that had the Atomic Wedgie versus how much more it gained as the story progressed and that viewership continued. And I think that would really be telling of if it really was the Atomic Wedgie that was the thing, or the characters and any other Wedgie that did it. And I'm not sure there is a way to look at it after the fact instead of just recording what happened as it was posted. So, quite the upset. I am upset.
But don't worry, we're about to relieve a lot of stress because now we're all just gonna beat the shit out of Jocklock.
Oh, but that's gonna be such an easy match. And I think everybody knows it. So
let's just
for the second semifinal match, we have Jocklock versus Hanging. Here we go.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's just one thing I wanted to bring up about this, because let's face it, Hanging's going to move on to the finals, and we're all in agreement to this. Does anybody think Jocklock is going to move on?
I want to hate like it, but I can't do it.
I can fight for it.
There was only one thing that I wanted to bring up about this, and it was the point that we made in the Hanging itself, where we talked about starting a story with the Wedgie.
Yeah.
Do we think that Jocklock is as effective starting a story as a Hanging? And if so, why?
I mean, I'm still thinking of the whole thing where you can start the story with that, like, oh, you're probably wondering how I got here. And but the problem is that could also apply right to the Hanging too.
Yes.
So, and then the Hanging, at least it's a little crazier, if you know what I mean. Like, there's a little more to it. Like, you gotta wonder how'd they get all the way up there, or how'd they get over there, and yeah, it's just the Hanging's better, man. Don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, it's a great question, JCCW, and it's difficult to gauge effectiveness in starting with a Jocklock, only because it is so rare in that I can't think of a story that starts with one in that context, whereas the idea of one that starts with a Hanging is prevalent, and we mentioned, of course, Teacher Dominated by Wedgies is one that does start like that. It's very recent, it's popular, and it has it. So there's it I think goes even beyond that. Like What's with Andy, I think the cartoon show, I think it started very similar. He's stuck in a hanging wedgie or something, and I'm pretty sure you find out how he gets back. And that's animation, but there's writing obviously behind it. But yeah, I if we had more stories with Jocklocks at the start, that might be easier. But maybe that's a testament to what's better, right? Like what is most popular, and when we think about like its purpose in the story or something, Hanging Me is basically like they're so similar in that you're stuck where you are, you're constrained, your movement is going to make it worse, but just the Hanging seems more iconic, and like if we're saying it covers a range of different types of wedgies, then everything, like I said, from bouncings to dangling to the flagpole, right? You just get a lot more variety, which can't be a bad thing. Whereas Jocklock, it's like the feet have to go through the leg holes and you have to be stuck in it. And maybe you get a little variety, maybe you get carried around, but then it becomes a Hanging, right? Just with a different position of the underbreak. So I think it has to be Hanging.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of went into this one already knowing, and we joked about pretty much the whole time afterwards, like, it's not going to make it. It's hanging
Yeah.
all the way.
I think Hans's point that like you can do so much more with the hanging than you can with the jaw clock is definitely a huge point in the hanging's favor. One thing that I actually wanted to one thing I wanted to pose to both of you is what I just thought of as two absolutely, well, I think they're very funny, but also kind of cute character things. And it starts off with the just imagine this character, like they're saying, "Hey, you're probably wondering how I got here. Just imagine this. And here's the two scenarios.
Uh-huh.
The person is hanging in a locker, and you see them from the outside, and or the person is in a jock lock and they have their they have their elbow on the floor and their hand is supporting their head, and they just got this annoyed expression on their face. Like I'm just curious, like which one would you guys like really want to read more?
Ah, damn it. Why'd you have to make it so hard?
Because I was like, these are the two best scenarios for both of these. Like looking in the locker and just hearing this voice coming out of it, being like, "Hey, it's me. You're probably wondering how I got here." Like that is so funny. And then it's just such a cute little character thing where it's the person who, like, she's just got her like she got her hand holding up her cheek, and it's just like, "Yeah, it's me. You're probably wondering how I got here," and it's adorable.
I'd have to ultimately go with the locker one. I'm still in favor of hanging because jock lock can just go sit in the corner. It's not involved anymore.
It's funny because in those two, the way you sort of describe them, to me, the jock lock sounds more literally visual. Like you can actually see them in the wedgie, and they're actually kind of posing for you. And you start walking in this room, and they're kind of just lying there, like, "Hey, I bet you're wondering how I got in this position." And that to me is kind of funny because you probably walk in eyes wide, like, "What the? Who are you? And why are you in my bed with that wedgie? And please don't ever leave." Um, Compared to the locker, it's sort of like I don't, unless you're really trying to look through the small slats or something, or they describe it to you, or the locker's open, then it's totally different ball game. But like the locker's closed, you just hear the voice. You're kind of like, wait, why are you just randomly in the locker? Please show me the wedgie. But still, like I could see, and we have seen people hung up in lockers, and that's another level to the sort of stuck where you are thing. Whereas I think when you think about it too, I haven't tried this. I might maybe when I was younger, but getting out of a jock leg I think is easier than it's made out to be in a lot of stories and videos. You kind of just it's not a huge effort. I think so. I could be wrong on that though, and we'd have to test it and experiment to be sure. But if that's the case, it's sort of like, wait, don't you want something that's harder to get out of, something that's more of a trap? Hangings, you think, I'm pretty sure, would be better for that, especially if they're pretty high up on the ground, because it's like if I fall, that's gonna hurt, and I don't want to hurt.
Like poor Callista.
Yeah.
Where have we seen like many stories where somebody actually like gets a visually physical like injury from a hanging?
That kind of treads into grim, and I don't know who wants to read that.
Like I've done it once where Callista hurt her wrist, and like you could see like visually it really fucking hurt. So
yeah, you often don't. Stories are often so cartoony that even if they're kind of hanging from a distance, they'll fall on grass or something and just be like, "Oof," and get up.
It's
and
like,
sort of,
oh, ow, that hurt falling.
But to Mystic's point, sort of real grievous injury is pretty rare unless you go to the extreme and you get like crazy stuff, which we sometimes see in some stories where it's just like, wow, this is not for me. This is like people dying sort of stuff.
And die from a hang.
Yeah, like the really intense stuff. But usually on the spectrum, we see a lot less sort of real injuries. You get the cartoony injuries. I'm gonna put like the gel or the sort of lotion on my butt in like between two cheeks, or like the whole edgy verse where they have like the out sun cream or whatever, or you put ice packs on and that heals the boo boos sort of thing. But yeah, it's rare to see actual injuries, to your question.
Well, I mean, let me just pose it to you this way. Unless you're into it, you don't really go looking for it. You might have to cut that out, actually. You might have to cut that out.
I mean, you're gonna stumble on stuff perhaps by accident. You go, "Oh, what's the story?" And then you're reading into, you're like, "Oh my gosh, that person just died. What? I didn't want to read that." And that's happened sometimes.
I mean, that happened to me when I was 13 and I stumbled on my first porn site and I was like, boobs, no!
Jeez, yeah. That's me to this day.
No boobs, only wedgies.
Yeah. Preach it.
Yeah, hanging. No,
Hanging.
ain't good.
Yeah.
I think that there is some cute character potential with the jock lock, and I'm probably gonna use that one day. But I'm gonna do a hanging before that, so
you have warned me to the potential of a jock lock, and let's revisit this after we see a bunch of jock lock stories, and then we'll decide for real.
Definitely.
So it sounds like 3 votes in favor of hanging against jock lock. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, after such a huge battle between the atomic and the normal, we have a pretty one-sided match for the hanging and the jock lock. And so, in the finals, the last match. I guess not the last match, technically, because we have the bronze match, the third place match. We have
place match. Oh, come on.
We have the third place match is going to be a very simple affair, but the final match of this tournament, we have the normal versus the hanging. Here we go.
Well, gosh dang it. Gosh dang it. Ryan just reminded me that, yeah, Hannah and Sarah did start out with not just 1 atomic, but 2.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh dang it, that's right. I thought I hadn't done an atomic yet, and then I realized, wait a minute, no, it's just Sarah hasn't given an atomic to Hannah yet, but Hannah has received one, and I'm like, gosh, that is right. He brought that up. So I think by de facto, I have to pick atomic. Despite the fact that I would absolutely love to cause a double upset and just give Jocklock the 3rd place, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna give it to the atomic because it is very sexy.
Finally, again, we're arguing about atomic versus normal.
No, it's atomic.
Oh no, this is
Jocklock because this is the 3rd place.
This was okay. Okay. So I guess that would make more sense to have a 3rd place match. But I did say the normal versus the hanging, so for continuity's sake, this is the bronze match.
Right,
this is the bronze match. Atomic versus Jocklock, just so it makes more sense.
So this is atomic versus Jocklock.
Yes.
Oh well, that's easy. That's atomic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very sexy.
Yeah,
I would absolutely love to cause the upset of the Jocklock gets the 3rd place, simply because I think it can make for the really cute intro. Hey, it's me. You're probably wondering how I got here, but that is 100% not enough to dethrone the atomic at all. The atomic just has way more. It is way more fun to write than the Jocklock and the actual moment of it. You would much rather read a story about getting an atomic than you would getting a Jocklock, because there's just way more you can do with the atomic than you can with the Jocklock, and there is no debating. There's no debating that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just because don't get me wrong, the whole like, oh, you're probably wondering why I got here. That is a hell of a strong point, but it's also one of the only points it's got.
Yeah, that's the only point Jocklock has.
And I mean, if it was such a cute way to start a story, how come none of us have done it? how come we haven't written one, right? It's clearly not something that's super popular within the community for writing, and yeah, like in Shadow's more recent poll, it's third from the bottom, just above Propeller and Messy. So clearly not everybody's favorite, which I think speaks to that. And yeah, while I might be interested in trying it out, I'm even within the scenario we give of someone like, I bet you're wondering how I got here. It's like, well, someone gave you a Jocklock Wedgie. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot you can maybe go with that. Whereas, like, if they're hanging in a locker, it's like, wait, how did they get you in the locker? What's all the implications of that? Who did it? Was it the cheerleaders? So it sort of opens up some more potential.
You wish it was the cheerleaders.
It's like, hey, or if it's obviously if it's like an atomic, and it's like, whoa. Even if you're like, I can guess how that happened, I still want to see it happen because it is like the most popular wedgie and just the best.
Dude, I just thought of the greatest thing we have that you're wondering how I got here, and the person actually got wedgie by the chess club.
That'd be a nice surprise. If it'd be a story full of twists, like they walk past all the cheerleaders, and you're like, "Here it comes." Nope, just doesn't happen.
Walk past the cheerleaders, the football team.
Yeah. And then the chess club gets them because they forgot a rule. Like they did touch move or something, and they didn't understand chess, so they ended up getting punished. That'd be nice. That'd be good.
They moved the rook diagonally.
And it would be fitting because they're the chess team, right? They're not going to be wedgie experts, so Jocklock's the best they could do.
No, they will be wedgie experts because they've gotten him.
The story, I already have a name. The story is just subverted expectations. That's
Spoiler alert much, yeah. I like it.
Gosh, I want to make that. We should all just write
subverted expectations. Let's all do it.
And just see whose version comes out on top in the battle royale.
We'll make Jocklocks great again.
Hell yeah, I can get behind that slogan.
Too bad it's still not gonna.
I think you mean you'll make Jocklocks great in the first place because clearly they don't hold up.
No, they don't.
So we're in agreement.
Yes, I think. It sounds like Atomic wins this round. The first, I guess not the first, but the bronze, the third place.
Better than nothing.
Which is, I agree. It's that is so sad.
Got knocked down to the bronze podium.
I mean,
it's an
bringing up chess
place.
As
I feel very proud about that now.
You
I feel
should.
very proud that I was able to do that.
100% you should. Atomic was probably the hardest to beat, so that's quite an accomplishment to put under your belt.
But the final round.
I mean, as a sort of interlude, a small one. I have a couple honorable mentions that did not quite make the list, did not quite make the bracket for this debate. And they are the pile driver wedgie, the messy wedgie, the bra wedgie, the bra connection wedgie, the bouncing wedgie, and the ripping wedgie. The first four just did not seem like as... okay, so yeah, let's give a moment of silence.
More silence for those forgotten picks.
Well, okay, that's the moment. They weren't forgotten. They were just decided. It was decided that they were not as prevalent, as recognizable, as much of a powerhouse as the wedgies that were given in this bracket, except the ripping, which I honestly forgot about until a little bit ago. I'll be honest about that.
Yeah, it could have been up there. But the other ones you mentioned, they're all like in Shadow's list. Broad Connection, Pile Driver's not even on the list, but Broad Connection's a bit like sixth or something. At a quick glance. So yeah, it's certainly not as popular. Messy Wedgies. There's camps. Some
Banish
people
the
love
messy
it.
to the shadow
people-
realm.
Yeah, some people
Some-
love Messy Wedgies. It's like their favorite
people-
thing, and they want to get their favorite food in it because they're like, then it's even better. It's two
And it's
things I
just
love.
like
And then
not
there's me, and I'm like, I don't,
Ugh.
I'm not a fan. If you can keep it
Yeah.
kind of clean, like I've done it with Coca-Cola, and that story's pretty popular. But
Yeah.
I often forget about that. 'Cause when people ask me like,
Like,
what do you
it's
do? And I'm
so
kind of
hard
like,
to fit it
I do
into the
ice and
story.
water.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do
mean,
like the anime panties friend sessions thing of like I'm gonna put a whole recipe in their underwear. It's kind of like
What?
that's just
Which is
messy.
probably like the only great messy wedgie because it was actually incredibly creative. But
It was, yeah.
that is
Yep.
that is the only good messy wedgie I have ever read.
Yeah, it was good
or
for that.
seen ever.
Yeah, it was good
I
for
mean,
sure.
Ciceda's was decent in Karate Friends.
Oh, the
but-
pizza, yeah.
I feel like more than half of that is me just saying that because Karate Friends is one of my favorite stories of all time. So
Oh.
it's not entirely unbiased.
So what I'm really hearing
But I
is
I-
that it's a niche.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like in this niche community, Messy Wedgies is probably the most niche you can go. And just even thinking about it, just even talking about it, just kind of like grosses me out a little bit.
Yeah, it's polarizing more than
Yeah,
Like I
because-
said,
more than most
banish
others.
it to the shadow realm.
Yeah, 'cause
where
there's
it
ones that-
lives.
Yes.
Yeah, showroom. There's some that are just not as common. Pile drivers I like because you do get so you're sort of stuck where you are, and it is a more uncommon position, although very sort of similar as if they're sort of you're kind of just standing above them, but it's a bit different because your head is like right where it is in between their
Yeah, I
thighs,
mean-
and
And
I
in the
like that.
story, and in the story, you can kind of talk about the power dynamics with that.
Yep.
Kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, that's useful.
I find it very difficult to try and figure out where I would incorporate a pile driver compared to like any other wedgie. Like the only I think pile drivers work better in model videos on JR's Patreon than they do in
Yeah.
an actual wedgie story.
Interesting.
Well, let me put it to you
I don't
this.
know.
Hang on a sec. Let me put it to you guys this way. When you start to write a story, what pops into your mind when you're thinking of like what to do for it? Because I can guarantee you that in the few stories that I've written, it never organically occurred to me like, I think I'll use a pile driver this time.
That is
No,
very
it was-
true.
Every single time it's been atomic wedgies I wanted to incorporate, and
See?
that is something that I absolutely love writing atomic wedgies
They're the best.
because I've been able to come up with so many scenarios to do it in versus a normal wedgie where it's so commonplace and I've seen it so much from the very beginning of when I got into this fetish. And at this point, it's become boring to me to write unless I really try and put a ton of effort into writing them. Versus atomic wedgies, that they'll never get old to me. It's the amount of scenarios because I don't go for ultra realism to like earth realism as we live it. When I write my stories, I go for realism with some wedgies in it as natural things that happen normally as adults, which is not what happens normally.
Yeah, and while they're still possible, obviously, to pull off in real life, it's unlikely unless they're wearing super stretchy underwear, and most people just
Right.
aren't. Most people aren't determined as or given atomic wedgie in real life compared to like a normal pull. But I mean, this is what I was saying, guys. Normal
Because it's
boring.
because it's super
Atomic's
fucking hard to
exciting.
get an atomic in real life.
Yeah,
I've tried.
But that's
I have failed
But that-
every
I
time.
I have-
normal's boring.
but I've done it.
Exciting.
Yeah,
I've
I've
been
never
successful.
put. Well, I guess my thing is I don't like making people having people wear specific underwear, just
Mm.
because I want to give them an atomic. Like, I like them wearing what they want to naturally wear, because that to me is sexy as fuck. So I just let them wear whatever they want, and I have never been able to reach the atomic in that standard.
Gotta go with JC in this one, and
Okay, yeah.
the wedgies I've given, it's not easy to get in the stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is true. That is so true. But
Right.
I think even because I've never done it. I've never done it with someone that I've not talked with it through it first, so they understand what's going on. Like I'm into wedgies, and you actually like it's not really not gonna happen unless you have a specific kind of underwear. It's kind of like that build up with it it gets to me, and then you add on the fact that they're willing to do it and that they're going out of their way to get this kind of underwear, and then the payoff of, yes, I'm finally able to do it. Like this wedgie that was thought to be unattainable by me before, I'm now able to do it. It's like, it seems like, in my mind, it is just as I believe it was the hanging wedgie that I said was the really hard one to pull off, but whoever said it was that the payoff is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's the same way with me with atomic wedgies in real life. You got to work so hard for it, but that payoff, being able to see it in person, there's nothing like it.
All right, but one little thing, but writing.
Yeah.
I love writing them.
I'm gonna say that's the thing, though. He's fully right. Like, they're the unattainable thing, right? But what can we get in fiction? We can get the unattainable. We can
just
write
make
the
it happen
atomic
because we want.
Here we can go around and go say, hey, I'm gonna give you a normal wedgie, and I just do it. And then the stories can't really live up, and it doesn't really live up to the stories, right? When you spend so long fantasizing about it, you're just like, oh, I gave you I want to pull over your head, but I can't. Because I can't, unless you're Nufatora, and apparently it just happens to you, and you're super lucky. I mean, for the rest of us normal people, sort of like that is the end-all be-all, right? It's including hanging.
The closest
these
I
top
got
things.
was to the neck, and that was because she actually naturally wore stretchy underwear. But I tried. I really tried. It would not go above the head. It would not give the necessary, unless I literally forced back her head, and that was awkward.
In stories, we can get it over their head. That's the thing.
Exactly.
It can be us, and we can do it. That's why atomics are so great.
But you should never sell it cheap. Never just. That's why I completely disagree with opening with the atomic wedgie. I always feel like you should build up to it.
Yeah. Definitely.
All right. Well,
no argument here.
Bottom points. So.
All right.
Let's get to the vote.
Yes, the finale of this debate, with enough interlude to get rid of a lot of listeners. For the final match, and I'm glad that we had such a long interlude, because this defines the best listeners from
those scrubs.
The listeners, exactly.
From
Scrandies, as a good friend once told me. So for the final match of this debate episode, we have the normal wedgie versus the hanging wedgie. Here we go.
I'm going to just start, not by giving an argument, but I actually just kind of want to mention something. I mentioned earlier that a hanging necessitates needing to give a wedgie beforehand before you can actually administer the proper hanging. So this is actually a very fascinating final match, because essentially we are arguing what is better, the wedgie before the hanging or the actual hanging itself. Because I don't think my prior argument with the normal actually fits here, because I think that there is the potential for very strong character moments in the normal while it's happening, and in the hanging while it is happening. Because hanging, you can spend 30 minutes in your story time, just having the person hang, and the entire time can be spent just focusing on how they feel about their current situation. So I feel like they're even on those grounds. Like, do you think we agree on that?
You can make a good point. However, I'm gonna make my position known early, right off the bat. I'm gonna go with hanging, just because, in lieu of what you said earlier, with the whole like, technically speaking, you incorporate a normal into the hanging. So like, it's if you're really gonna get nitty gritty, it's already part of it. Like, it's ingrained into it.
That is fair. I will try and sway you though with an argument that Hans made earlier, where if you don't have the atomic, you don't have the rest of it. If you do not have this normal, you don't have a hanging wedgie. Try and administer a hanging wedgie without giving a normal wedgie. You cannot do that. Physically, it is impossible to do that.
Chicken and egg. It's just chicken and egg, but then again, it did start with early fun.
No, I don't think it's a chicken and an egg. I think it's an egg and an omelet.
Alrighty. How about you, Hans? What you got?
Yeah, pushing aside the metaphysics of wedgies for a moment, although that is pretty fascinating. My world's been turned upside down since Atomic lost. So, in my mind, if normal is somehow better than what is almost inarguably, but clearly not somehow, the best wedgie in the community, and most people would agree with that, then doesn't normal have to be the winner just by default?
Yes, normal has to be the winner.
I started off saying it is from which all other wedgies come from, and JCCW made that point, I guess, to embrace the metaphysics of it. You can't have any wedgie without the beginnings of a normal wedgie. Although, what happens if it's a frontal? That's not a normal wedgie. So there are some exceptions to that. Or if they do it with pants or something. So maybe not all things start with a wedgie, or like a normal quote unquote wedgie. So perhaps that's something to keep in mind. Like if they have shorts on, is that a normal wedgie but no underwear sort of thing? You know what I mean? So I'm in a weird position where I feel like normal kind of somehow by default has to win, but if I maybe think about it and I wonder if maybe not everything is a normal, or doesn't have to start with a normal, then maybe hanging can eke it out because it is the second most popular for people. It is, as we continually mention, something that is so difficult to achieve. So you get the indirect characterization that many of you here mention is so important. You can sort of show how determined a bully is by going to these lengths to hang them up. Plus, again, it's variety. It's not much unlike a normal, which is, I think we can probably sort of agree, it's a standard pull for probably not a super long amount of time. Not going too high, because then you'd lift them off the ground, and not going too small, because then it's almost like a natural wedgie. But you can bounce them. You can put them on a flagpole, right? These sort of things that are the epitome of the community, the things we saw that sort of first got us into the fetish, probably, when we were looking at these cartoons that the majority of the people in the community say is what sort of got them in. It was often the hanging wedgies, I think, for their power, and that translates into our writing. It's the helplessness. It's the character moments, like you mentioned, JCCW, because you can have this dialogue and interaction, but they can fit within a wedgie. It's not like they can hang there and they can talk to a person, and you get so much of that. All the edgy verse stories where people are hanging in a tree and discussing, or even Camp No Name where that happens by Maggie Pulls. Even the beginning of Teacher Dominated by Wedgies, where the teacher is talking to Ellie and they're stuck in that wedgie, and you get characterization on both sides of that, right? So it's a way to fit it in. It can drive the story forward, as I mentioned, being a sort of key thing, because you can start off so many stories, like we said, with the guess how I got up here, and that's so common because people clearly enjoy doing it. and it works really well. So I guess I was gonna start by saying normal, but I guess for a lot of the reasons that have kept coming up, because it's so powerful a thing, because it fits into why we like the fetish and why we sort of rate these stories, I'm probably gonna have to say hanging.
I really want to change your mind on this one, Ryan, because I got to bring up something. I've constantly heard that we talk about what the community loves, like what is the most popular, like what do people like seeing. I don't think this is a popularity contest at all, because we have been talking about what is good writing, what is good in an actual story. And popularity doesn't have to mean what's good in a story. It can mean just what we think really works whenever we're writing a story. And here's my biggest argument in favor of the normal and not in the hanging, because this is something that is only achievable in the normal. Even in the situation where you have to give a normal and then give a hanging, this only happens during the normal part. A normal involves 2 characters. A hanging only involves 1, in the traditional sense, not in any external situation where you have multiple people hanging. In the traditional sense, a normal involves one, and a normal involves 2 people, and a hanging is 1. And I say that because in the normal, you can have one person and you can focus on their character and how they enjoy giving. And you can have one person and you can get into their psyche and think about what they're talking and think about what and talk about what they're thinking about while they're getting. And in hanging, you can only get the person who's just hanging there. That is the only perspective you get. Where in the normal, you get multiple, and you can expand on that, and you can also connect those. Where in the hanging, all you have is the one person, and I guess in the aftermath, they can feel something about the hanging with another person. But in the actual moment, you can have the person connect with the person giving them. Like, you can have the person look back as the person they're getting a wedgie from, and just fill that with emotion. It's either, why are you doing this to me, or keep going, or this is so embarrassing. You can fill that with so much possibility, way more possibility than you can with just one person. And that is why I will say normal, because it allows for way more character opportunities. You have a lot of character opportunities with one person, but it is just amplified when you have that second person there. And that is the strength of the normal that you cannot possibly get with the hanging. Unless you make it extremely out there, you take way too many creative liberties in order to get to that point. In the traditional sense, and in most people's sense, when they're writing a story, you have way more opportunity to make great character with normal than you do with the hanging.
All right, but JC, let me just mention something. Since you brought up the whole like 2 character thing with a normal, let me just bring something up. How many stories are out there where it's 2 people hanging in a wedgie together?
I said in the traditional sense.
No, and I mentioned a couple of those Mystics, right? Like I mentioned,
Yeah,
Camp No
but that
Name, I
doesn't-
mentioned the reverse ones. But I mean, to your point, JCCW. I mean, how do you get up on the hook, right, or wherever you're hanging? Someone's got to give that to you, and unless they leave, and even if they do, that doesn't mean you can't get the reaction of whoever gave, or whoever's in the room watching and laughing at you as you got it. Right. It seems like an elevation of all these emotions you're talking about, because it's like, why would you stand and watch me now hang from this wedgie? What do you get from that? And you can either explore that in direct characterization of like, yeah, I want to watch you squirm, or like in a Karate Friends, they hang up Mandy and then walk away. So you know, like, this is just the routine. They just bully her and they just embarrass her, and then she's stuck there. And she does get a lot of deep personal emotions. You're right. If you sort of hang yourself up alone, you can certainly dive deep into one person's reaction. But it's not, I don't think just because someone gets hung up, that means there's only one person. I don't know how that can be true unless it really is a self.
The,
And even then,
the
like,
answer
you can
to that
still.
would be that
Okay.
the answer to that would be that hanging has the exact same problem as the atomic, and that there is way too much going on, and you can't properly focus on the person who is giving, because their whole thing is that they're giving it. So that means all of their time has to be spent giving the actual wedgie. There is very little time compared to them just giving a normal one, because what does the giving person have to do in a hanging wedgie? They have to, first of all, just give the normal wedgie and get it high enough. So that's a lot of time already spent. You need to describe, like, the initial pull and then the next pull and then enough to get the hanging proper, and then they have to actually hang them, and it's just like, that's way too much. Where in the normal, it can even just be just a simple pull and then one more later on after you explore a lot of the character. You can't get that possibly with the hanging. It just messes with the pacing immensely, and I think that is a huge flaw in the actual hanging in terms of writing the story.
Now, you might have a point with that. However, isn't there some saying where the worst thing you can have is time alone with yourself? You get real introspective, you're all alone. Or, who knows?
I guess sort of.
Yeah, maybe someone got hung up with you and you're basically just chatting with them. It's like, oh, so they got you too, huh? Oh no, oh dear, something like that.
That was kind of lame, because everybody always has the same reaction whenever they're hanging together. It's like, wow, this sucks.
It's certainly not an
Think about
individual
every story
thing.
you have where somebody hangs next to some other person. The reaction is always the same from both people, and it's incredibly lame. I think there has only been one time where the reaction was totally different, and it was in Cicetta's Harry Potter series, or the Hermione getting wedgie series, where there's one scene where 3 people get hung on a tree, and the only one with a different reaction is Luna, and that's because she's out of her own world. Literally, the only different reaction someone could have in a hanging wedgie is if they literally don't know they're getting one, and I think that is a huge fail for the hanging.
But I mean, it's sort of, to Mystic's point, it kind of pokes a hole in your argument that it is like an individual thing and you can't get multiple perspectives, which, I mean, as we've been saying, isn't necessarily true, and to generalize isn't particularly fair. But I mean, more to your point that you don't want the description of the clutter. I mean, we mentioned earlier we want the buildup, right? Like, we have seen the Experience Project stories that are rushed, and it's like, and then they gave them a normal wedgie, and then they hung them up or whatever. You need that buildup, right? That buildup is so key to what we're doing. The descriptions, we want to know what people are thinking and feeling. And if you say to me that we don't want that we want to sort of just, it's too much to sort of describe a hanging and move into it, I'm gonna have to push back and say, isn't that what you've done in so many of your stories? Like, you don't rush into them. You give us people's thoughts and feelings, and it's just more, and it's just longer if it's a hanging, right? And isn't that good?
I do that. That has nothing to do with the actual wedgie itself. And you just said that, is that I build up with character. I don't build up with a wedgie at all. And in the hanging, you have to build up with a wedgie. You have to. You have to describe every step of the hanging wedgie, because it is such a complicated process. This is why a hanging wedgie is way better as an opening scene than it is actually writing it, because you have to spend so much time writing about the actual process of the hanging wedgie, wherein if you start it out and the person is just in it already, you can already explore the character in that. You can just jump right into that, and you can really dive deep into that, wherein the actual process of it just feels like it collapses, and one person is dedicated to moving the plot along instead of being an actual character. And in that sense, the normal is 100% better, and the hanging completely fails.
That's an excellent point. But I think we've been pushing this around back and forth for a little while now. So, I take it, JC, that your vote is definitely for the normal?
100%, because it is way more better for character than it is for the hanging.
Alright. I will admit, got a little shook there a little bit, but I'm still partial to the hanging, just because of how you can leverage it or use it. And also because technically the normal is the beginning of the hanging, and you can't have one without the other. But that's just my point and my perspective. So,
I mean, technically, you can have a normal and not follow it up with a hanging. In a hanging, you have to have the normal.
fair
You
point.
can't do it without it.
Fair point, man. What you got, Hans? What's your vote for?
I don't even know anymore. I guess I'll stick with hanging. For all those reasons I said.
You gotta feel your choice in your soul. You gotta like, where's my surfer
Think
lingo?
about all the character you've done.
Like where's my surfer lingo? You gotta like feel it, bro. It's
Gotta feel the wave, bro.
you don't fight the wave, man. You can't fight the wave. You just go with it. You ride that tube, take that gnarly ride. You just go with the flow, man, and your flow can change. But what's your flow telling you?
Yeah, I guess I'll probably settle on hanging.
Or you know what? What if, random idea, if you're so stuck on being neutral, what's Noof got?
Oh, that is a tough one. I mean, I do agree with Mystic that you gotta feel the dragon energies of the earth, man. You just gotta feel the dragon pulses of the earth, and you just gotta go with your gut. But this is a tough one. But I gotta go with normal. If I'm giving my honest opinion.
All right, so what if for this round and this round specifically, because it's so important, we'll just say
Final round.
we'll just say that Noof's point counts. And since Han's neutral, I guess that
No,
means
I said hanging. I said hanging.
Yeah, you're freaking tying the vote.
Oh,
Yeah.
never mind. I guess we're tying it then. What a shit. No, I'm just joking.
No, my vote. The moderator's vote does not count for any points, unfortunately. Otherwise,
If it did, then the atomic would have tied with the normal.
yes, and we would have had to go into overtime. I don't know how that would have worked.
We have
Yeah, that
So-
wouldn't have worked at all.
So, to close out this debate tournament, we have the hanging wedgie is the ultimate victor at 2 votes versus the normal wedgie at 1.
I really
What
tried. I
a-
really tried for normal. I really tried for it.
You convinced me, JCCW. When you brought up the 2-person versus 1-person perspective, I was literally like, holy shit, my mind is blown. I like clapped my hands together hard, like, god damn, you have this argument in the bag.
I thought I had it because all of the character work that you can do with 2 people, but damn it, I couldn't do it.
Sorry, man.
Oh,
Sorry, man.
You had me.
I tried so hard.
I just kept going over and over in my head, like, but the character interactions between 2 people stuck up, whether they hate each other or not. Ah, it's right there.
But, I mean, at the same time, I feel like there is less that you can do with even 2 people suffering hanging wedgies together versus 2 people in a normal wedgie. Because 2 people in a normal wedgie, it could be 1 person giving the wedgie, 1 person receiving, 2 people getting a wedgie, or 2 people giving a wedgie at the same time. Versus hanging, you have 1 person hanging, 1 person looking on, or the receiver, or 2 people hanging, or maybe 2 people giving a hanging wedgie. I don't think it's as diverse.
I see your point.
Yeah.
Isn't it the exact same?
Unfortunately, the moderate can't actually do anything
Exactly.
about it, and we're stuck with hanging as the winner.
My
Good
votes don't
job,
count.
guys. Like,
Yeah,
I tried
no,
my
that
hardest,
was-
but we came out with a victor.
3 upsets so close together. Wow, that was. I honestly was thinking it would be the atomic wedgie versus the self wedgie at the end. I wasn't sure about the normal because it is such a staple of the community, but I really thought it would be atomic versus self.
I thought it was going to be
that's
atomic versus hanging. So
I thought it was
No,
going to be
I'm
atomic
wrong.
versus hanging, but I pulled through and made the normal get to the finals. I am taking that second place
I
and running
don't.
with
I'm gonna hold
just-
that grudge against you forever.
it.
yeah.
That is my proudest moment in the entire community right there, is doing that. That is the highlight of this debate.
Absolutely. There's so many great points made all throughout. And I sincerely want to thank you guys so much for coming on this. It was fantastic to hear your guys' points and your points of view. And it was just so much fun to just listen
This was
to
a lot of fun.
a fantastic debate.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, dude.
Thank you.
Thanks
thank
for
you
having us.
on.
Mm-hmm. Happy to be a
Wow.
part.
And coming in over in 2 hours. That's crazy. But I'm not gonna edit the audio at all. I'm just gonna put a musical interlude. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been a very special episode of the Best Book Club. Please give it any kind of rating, any kind of feedback. Give me whatever you can. I need to know how I'm doing. I need to know how I can improve. Please give whatever you can. And then, I'm going to keep going. So I guess we'll find out how it goes from whatever feedback I get. If I don't get any, I'm going to keep doing whatever the fuck I feel like. So I will see all of you, whoever's listening. Maybe some of you and the debaters listen to this. I will see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. This has been the Best Book Club with Saselam, a.k.a. Nufatora. Goodbye.